Starts Nazir Daf Yod Tes contains one Mishnah near the end of the Daf. First, the Daf will finish the discussion about a Nazir who became Tomei in the middle of his Nazirus and the Karbanos he has to bring. We saw 4 opinions as to when his next Nazirus, when he can restart the count of Nazirus. The Gemara is going to want to know which of those 4 opinions is the author of a Brisa the Gemara is going to quote. And then the Gemara will go back to discussing our most recent Mishnah line by line. Towards the end, we'll get to the new Mishnah, which will discuss somebody who makes a vow of Nazirus in Chutz La'aretz and special halachos that apply to that. So let's begin. We've seen 4 opinions as to when a person can start counting the Nazirus after he finishes being metaher from the tumah that he encountered in his old Nazirus. And those 2 opinions, in those 4 opinions, we'll focus now on 2 of them. The opinion of the Chachamim, who say that he can only start counting after he brings the Karban Chatas on the 8th day of his Tahara, even though he didn't bring the Karban Oila or the Karban Asham. And the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, who says that he can only start after he brought the Chatas and the Asham. Now, we said earlier that according to Rabbi Shmuel, the Karban Oila that he brings is a kapara. According to the Chachamim, it's not a kapara, it's just a present, just a gift, as it were, kaviyachol, but it's not an actual part of the kapara process. The Gemara quotes a Brisa. The Brisa says that if a woman makes a vow of Nazirus, so then she becomes tamei, and she prepares the 3 korbanos she needs to bring, a chatas ha'oif, an eilas ha'oif, and a keves for an asham, and then her husband goes ahead and he's meifir her neder of Nazirus in the first place, so it turns out that her Nazirus is cancelled or even uprooted. So this Brisa says the halacha is that she still has to bring the chatas oif, but she doesn't have to bring the oilas oif. So who is the author of this Brisa, and why is there a difference between a chatas oif and an oilas oif? So Chizah says it's Rabbi Shmuel, and because Rabbi Shmuel is the one who holds that the oila is mechaper, since her Nazirus was cancelled by her husband, she does need a kapara. She does not need a kapara anymore. She doesn't have to bring the oila. However, according to Chachamim, that it's a Deirain, it's a gift, she would still have to bring the gift. The fact that she no longer needs a kapara makes no difference as far as bringing that gift that she has to bring. So Gemara asks, I don't understand Rabbi Shmuel. You're telling me that he holds that she still needs a kapara, so then how come she only has to bring the korban oilas oif and not, how come she has to bring the chatas oif and she doesn't have to bring the oilas oif? That is, we said she no longer requires a kapara. So how come she still has to bring the korban chatas? So now, if you want to say, so there's 2 ways to analyze what happens when her husband is meifir her Nazirus. It could be that her husband uprooted it and it no longer exists, as if it never happened. If that's the case, she shouldn't need any kapara. She was never a Nazir in the first place, so she shouldn't have to bring a chatas oif. If, however, the husband stops it when he's meifir, but he doesn't uproot it, and she still was a Nazir who became Tomei, so then she should have to bring a chatas oif and a oilas oif. Why should there be a difference? Why should the halacha be that she only has to bring a chatas and not an oilas? So the Gemara answers that we hold, Rabbi Shmuel here holds that it uproots it, and she was never a Nazir in the first place. However, she did take a vow of Nazirus. And we're holding here like the opinion of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, who holds that anybody who takes a vow of Nazirus is like he did a sin, because he shouldn't be restricting himself unnecessarily. And therefore he has to bring a chatas. And in this woman's case, she has to bring a chatas for the fact that she made the vow of Nazirus, even though her husband uprooted it. Somewhere quotes Rabbi Elazar HaKapar and brings the discussion, it brings nearly every time it brings this opinion. Rabbi Elazar HaKapar says, what is learned out of V'chipur olav ha'koyin me'asher chata ala nefesh? Why do we say that a Nazir is chata ala nefesh? Because he pained himself by withholding from wine. And we say kal v'chomer, somebody has to bring korban chatas for just withholding himself from wine. Certainly somebody who accepts a fast upon himself has to bring a korban for fasting unnecessarily. So Gemara asks about this. The pasuk is not talking about a Nazir stam. This pasuk is talking about a Nazir who became tamei. So Gemara answers, the Rabbi Elazar HaKapar holds that this refers to any Nazir. He's a sinner no matter what. The reason that it's mentioned in the context of somebody who became tamei is because he's a double sinner. He should never have made himself a Nazir, and if he's a Nazir, he certainly should not have become tamei at all. The Gemara now refers back to our most recent Mishnah. The Gemara discusses the next line in the Mishnah there. There we saw that somebody who makes a vow of Nazirus while he's in the cemetery, meaning while he is Tameh. So the Mishnah says that if he leaves the cemetery and then he goes back in, the days that he was out count toward his Nazirus, and therefore, since he became Tameh again, he's chayiv a new set, he's chayiv korbanos, and haircut, like any Nazir who became Tameh. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? If he leaves the cemetery and goes back in, he was still Tameh the whole time. He has to do the Tahara process. So the Gemara answers, the Shmuel says, that's what we're talking about. He left the cemetery, he was Matahar, he did the Parah Aduma on the third day on the seventh day, and he went to the mikvah, and he did everything he needs to do. Then, if he became Tameh, the days that occurred then from after he was Matahar count towards his Nazirus, and any time he becomes Tameh again, he has to bring new korbanos and take a new haircut. So Gemara asks, then why doesn't it tell me that the days count just because he left? Why does it have to tell me that if it comes back in, it counts? It says if he left the cemetery and he comes back in, it counts. If you're talking about where he became Tahar, so then certainly if he left, that should be enough for it to count. It shouldn't have to be if it comes back in. So Gemara says, yes, that's what it means. It means that he left, then it starts counting, and if he comes back in, then it counts towards. He has to be chayiv. He's a Tameh again, and he's chayiv a new korban and haircut. Now, this is even, the Gemara says, Chiddush here is even if he came back in on the seventh day itself, because once he already went to the mikvah and he already sprinkled the Parah Aduma water, it's already considered like his Nazirus begins, and therefore he can now, if he becomes Tameh again, he has to do it over again. So now the Gemara mentions Rav Kahana said to Rav Asi, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi said to Rav, why didn't you explain this Mishnah to us like Shmuel did? And he answered, I thought you knew the pshat yourself, you didn't need me to explain it to you. The Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah again and discusses the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds that a Nazir who begins his Nazirus B'tumah, and then he becomes Tahar, and then after he becomes Tahar, he becomes Tameh again. So the halacha is that he only becomes Tameh again and has to do the entire procedure again if he becomes Tameh after 2 days at least of Tahara. That is the day in which he becomes Tahar, plus the next day. But if on the day he becomes Tahar, he becomes Tameh again, that doesn't count. And the reason is because the Torah says, Vayamam Harishanim Yiplu, you need multiple days, plural, to be knocked out by the next Tumah in order for the whole procedure to be done again. So the Gemara quotes Ula. Ula says that Rabbi Eliezer only holds this in the case of a Tameh who made his Nazirus B'tumah, and then he was Tahar, and then he became Tameh again. If, however, he made his Nazirus B'tahara, then he became Tameh. And on the and he became Tameh after just 1 day, so he only has 1 day of Nazirus under his belt. Rabbi Eliezer would not say there that it says Hayamim Harishanim Yiplu, and therefore it can only knock out if there's multiple days. He would say there even 1 day is enough to knock them out and to be mechayev the whole procedure. How do you see that? So Ula says, and Rav explains this for Ula, because the Torah says, Yamim Harishanim Yiplu ki Tameh Nizroi. Tameh Nizroi implies that we're talking about somebody who made his Nazirus in a state of Tumah from the beginning. That's the implication of the wording there. And just about him, it says Yamim Harishanim Yiplu. That's dafka somebody who began B'tumah. If you're talking about somebody who began B'tahara and he only has 1 day, there the Torah didn't say anything about it, and that's enough to trigger the entire procedure. So now Abai asked Akash on this, so you see clearly in a brisa, not that way. You see a brisa that says that even if he began B'tahara, he still has to have a minimum of 2 days according to Rabbi Eliezer. So the brisa says as follows: somebody who says he makes a vow of Nazirus to last 100 days. So if he becomes Tameh on day 1, says the Mishnah, you would think it knocks out the 1 day. Therefore the Torah says Hayamim Rishonim Yiplu, he needs to have multiple days. And this one doesn't have Yamim Rishonim, it doesn't have multiple first days to knock out. Now, if he becomes Tameh on day 100, so you might think there also knocks out all the previous days, but it will not, because it says Yamim Rishainim Yiplu, which implies that there are Achrayim, there are later days still to come that aren't knocked out. But this one doesn't have any later days because he's on the last day. So therefore that is also excluded from this. Now, if it's on day 99, you may think, alright, so that should be also excluded. So therefore the Torah says, Yamim Rishainim Yiplu, the first days are knocked out, and this one has first days. The last days, the Achrayim are not knocked out, and this one has last days, so therefore this one qualifies and it applies. So now, is this talking about a Tomei who made a vow of Naziris B'Tumah, or is it talking about a Tahar who made a vow of Naziris B'Tahara and then became Tomei? So Abai says it has to be talking about a Tahar who made a vow of Naziris. Why? Because it says, Hareini Nazir Yom V'Nitma B'Tchilas Hameya. He said that he took, the Brisa says he took a vow of Naziris for 100 days, and he became Tameh on day 1. So it clearly shows he didn't start B'Tumah, he became Tameh. And still, you say this halacha that he has to have plural days to have passed B'Tahara. So this is clear kasha on Ula. So Gemara concludes, Tiyufta, you're right, it's a kasha, there is no defense. The Gemara now asks, her Papa asked, how do you define these 2 days that have to have passed already? It has to be a Yamim Yiplu, 2 days that will be cancelled when he becomes Tameh. Is it that he's in the middle of day number 2, so he ended off day 1 because day 1 began in the middle of the day when he became Tahar, and then he begins day 2, and now you have Mixasim Kikuli on both days and it counts as 2 full days? Or does he have to have the second day be a full day? And it's only really when he's already in the 3rd day that you can count 2 days, the half of the first day and the entire 2nd day. So Gemara says that Rav Papa asked this to Abai, and Abai didn't have the answer, so he went and asked Rava. And Rava said, no, you only have to have 2 half days. You don't have to have the second day be full, and that's learned out of the fact that it says Yamim and Yiplu. It says 2 terms plural. Would have been a way to phrase it with either one plural and not the other one. The fact that it says both of them is to teach you that you need to have 2 days, but you don't have to have 2 full days. It's enough to have half the first day and half the second day. Both of them makes the same kikuloi, and that counts. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses what happens if somebody makes a vow of Naziris while he's in Chutz La'aretz. Now, the halacha is that all of Chutz La'aretz outside Eretz Yisrael is metame midrabanan. The Rabbanan were concerned that there's a grave at any point, any place outside Eretz Yisrael, and there's tumah d'Rabbanan there. So therefore, this person who made a vow of Naziris in Chutz La'aretz is really making Naziris b'tumah in a state of tumah midrabanan. So he's going to keep his Naziris because he's in Chutz La'aretz, and midaraisa he's not Tameh, so he can do his Naziris. The problem starts when he comes to Eretz Yisrael at the end of his Naziris to bring his Kabbanas. What do you do now? So Beis Hillel and Mishame both agree that he has to do his Naziris over again. The question is, how much does he have to do over again? So if it was a standard Naziris of 30 days, everybody agrees he has to do the whole Naziris of 30 days. The question is, if he was Makabel a longer Naziris, does he have to do the entire thing over, or even a longer Naziris only has to do 30 days over? Beis Shammai says even a longer Naziris only has to do 30 days over. Beis Hillel says he has to do the entire Naziris over again when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, a stronger knas, a stronger penalty for having done his Naziris in a state of Tumah D'Rabbanan. Now the Mishnah brings a story that happened with Heleni Amalka, who was a king, a descendant of the queen, descendant of the Chashmonayim. Her son went to war, and she said, if he'll come back whole and in peace, I will be a Nazira for 7 years. And the son did come back, and so she kept 7 years of Naziris, and she came to Eretz Yisrael in order to bring her Kabbanas at the end of Naziris, and Beis Hillel told her, you got to do all 7 years over again. So she went and did all 7 years over again, and just as the 7 years were ending, she became Tameh. And now, therefore, she had to do the 7 years again a third time. So she ended up doing 21 years of Naziris. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees on the story. He says it wasn't 21 years of Naziris total, it was total of only 14 years of Naziris. Gemara, the next daf, will explain what the story was exactly according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Gemara asks, what's pshat on machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai? Is it dependent on the machlokas as to how severe the tumah of Chutz La'aretz is? We know there's a discussion, is the tumah on Chutz La'aretz only on the earth of Chutz La'aretz, if you're oel on the earth of it, but if you're just in the air of Chutz La'aretz, it's not matami, or is it even on the air? So Gemara wants to say, maybe Beis Shammai, who's Machamer, says he has to do, Beis Shammai, who's Mekel, and says he doesn't have to do the entire Naziris over again, holds that that's because the Gzeira of Naziris is weak, It's only on the earth and not on the airspace. And Beis Hillel, who's machmir, is because they hold that the Gzeira of Naziris of Chasaretz is strong, let's see it on the airspace. One says, no, that's not the Pshat and the Machlekes. They both agree, and we have a different Gersais here, what they agree to. Either the more machmir version that the air is Matame, or our Gers is the less machmir version that only the ground is Matame. The Machlekes just is, what is the Knas? How is the penalty defined? Was it defined as redoing the entire Naziris, or only defined as redoing 30 days?